Welcome to the Principles of Performance podcast, where we discuss how to optimize your health, fitness, and performance. Drawing on decades of experience of working as coaches, consultants, and trainers to top performers, athletes, and teams from professional sports to top universities to the U.S. military, Eric DeGatti and Mike Perry discuss topics and strategies of how to perform at your highest level and be your very best. Join us and our friends and colleagues who are leaders in the fitness and performance industry as we investigate and challenge the most popular training, nutrition, lifestyle, and recovery protocols. And away we go. Here we are with episode number 54 of the Principles of Performance podcast. I am your host, Eric DeGatti, along with my co-host, Mike Perry. And we have another stellar show for us today, Perry.
Yeah, we do. We've got this guy from Maine that knows something about baseball. So it's pretty cool to have this guy on. No, I've known Eric for a very, very long time. Early on when I started my career, 20 years ago, he was a guy that I had heard of, and through my mentors in the baseball world, I learned about Eric, and he's been one of those guys in Massachusetts and New England that's been a staple in the strength and conditioning industry, and one of the most respected guys out there. So we're really excited to have Eric today. So Eric, it's awesome to have you here, and I'm gonna have Mr. DeGatti go through your bio because I just can't read very well.
All right, so let me introduce you to Eric Cressey for those who are unaware and live under a rock. He's the president, co-founder of Cressey Sports Performance with facilities in both Hudson, Massachusetts, and Palm Beach Gardens, Florida. And he's perhaps most well known for his extensive work, as Mike said, with baseball players, with his role that he has now at the New York Yankees as the director of player health and performance. And he's also an accomplished author. I've read a ton of stuff that he's done, over 500 published articles that's been in everything from men's health to men's fitness, ESPN, you name it. He's also had a bunch of different books and DVD sets that's sold all over the world. Speaks all over the world in different countries. He's also on the advisory board for the IYCA in precision nutrition, and a baseball consultant to New Balance, and has some very cool Cressey New Balance sneakers, which is something that we all aspire to. He also served as strength and conditioning coach for USA Baseball under 19 national team that won the gold medal in 2015 in Japan. And he's also he also walks the walk. He's a very good powerlifter, holds several state, national, world records. He's hit 540 on the squat, 402 on the bench, 650 on the deadlift, and 1530 in a total. I actually got to see Eric deadlift up at his facility when I went up for his pitching internship. I told him it was like watching Jimmy Page play Stairway to Heaven. It was pretty cool. But all that being said, he's an all-around awesome guy, and we are super thrilled to have him on the show. Eric Cressey, welcome.
Nice, guys. Appreciate the warm intro. That was too much, but you're very kind.
Awesome. So the first question I want to know is, you got two huge facilities, two different states, two young kids, podcasts, books, articles, and director of performance for one of the largest sports teams in the world. Like, where do you fit it all, and when do you sleep?
Yeah, it's three kids, believe it or not. So I'm extra overwhelmed compared to what you described, but no, I think the solution is multifactorial. I think the first thing is I have an incredibly understanding wife who also is a workaholic, just like I am. So I think there's strength in numbers, and we both tend to be pretty type A with trying to manage a rigorous schedule and being very meticulous with a lot of our planning. So, I've always said, like, in the context of a gym, that every hour of training requires an hour of planning, whether that's programming or logistics behind the scenes or anything like that. And I think just the way you organize your time, does that as well. So, in the context of having two facilities and the Yankees' responsibility, I'm fortunate to have some really good people that really take the lead with our Massachusetts facility. So I'm not, an everyday presence there. I still have involvement, but not nearly as much as I used to. So I kind of stepped away from the Massachusetts role to focus, more heavily on the Florida facility. And then obviously the kind of the nature of the Yankees and the offseason role is they are pretty much, the yin and the yang in terms of the time of year where, things are crazy during the season for the Yankees and maybe a little bit quieter in the offseason, whereas things are crazy in the offseason at the the business, and then a little quieter once the major league season starts. So I was able to kind of pull those two things off, and was fortunate to have, really, I guess accommodating organization to work with that helped us design this, position and build out departments in creative ways. So it's worked out well, but it takes a lot of planning, and it takes a lot of reliance on just really good people that hold up their end of their bargain as well.
Well, another testament to you, and I want to get your insight on it, but we had, your good friend Tony Gentilcore, who made a point to point out in his bio that it should have been called Cressey training systems in the beginning. But
yeah.
But Tony said, and then also talking to Pete Dupuis, who I ran into at the Perform Better Summit down in Orlando, they both said that you are almost cyborg like in terms of your work ethic, in terms of, and that's always been the way since day one. Is that what you attribute a lot of your success to, or is there some other magic trick that you have?
Yeah, I think so. Yes, I mean, I think we're all mindful of like that people have different levels of kind of work ethics. I fell back on like a career as a powerlifter where I was really steadfastly devoted to that goal really, really early on. What I really think it comes back to is like I've just made a lot of sacrifices to be that kind of crazy with my professional career. Like I don't drink, my social life is largely driven through my kids and our athletes at the gym. Like, so I think I've just been willing to make a lot more sacrifices, for lack of a better term. Like I haven't gone on a lot of elaborate vacations and things like that. And obviously we've worked to correct that as we've had a family and things along those lines. But I think it's just more that I don't really get excited about like just sitting down and watching Netflix or having like shows. Like I think my wife and I watched 24 together back in the day, and I really can't remember the last like TV series that we actually watched together. So I think a lot of people call that being like a workaholic, but I really enjoy what I do. I love the people I work with. I enjoy kind of figuring things out, and that's one of the cool things about the Yankees is I head up player health and performance, which is strength conditioning and nutrition, but we also work in parallel to kind of a classic sports medicine setup, as well as our performance science department. But I have interactions with our hitting department, with our biomechanics lab, with our pitching guys, and I love kind of putting puzzles together. And so to me, that's way more exciting than watching TV or sitting by the pools, drinking margaritas or something like that. So I just think it has a lot to do with making sacrifices is a little bit easier when you absolutely love what you get to take on a daily basis.
So now something you just said kind of is a great segue into our next point in question is you're actually a former tennis player, right?
Yeah.
And so with that, hey, you go from being a tennis player to being the name in baseball training. Is it that there's so much carryover from one sport to the next, or is there just certain KPIs that you look for in terms of a sport, a position, and just basically understand, okay, well, what is this person needs and what is it that they don't have, and then just fill the gap? Is it that simple?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think that's part of it. For sure there are commonalities. I kind of fell into the baseball population because my shoulder was a mess from my tennis career, and I wanted to figure out, why it was the case and kind of rehab myself and avoided surgery. But it just so happened that I fell into working with baseball players when I first went to the private school after leaving graduate school. So I think it was a little bit of like the old saying is like, success is where, or what is it? Luck is where preparation meets opportunity. So I certainly prepared to understand shoulders and all that. And I just happened to fall into a population that could, really benefit from that expertise. And then it was on me to build it out and say, hey, I need to understand elbows better. I need to understand necks. I need to understand T-spines. So it kind of progressed from there. But yeah, the tennis thing has actually been, an accidental blessing. And it's funny because we've actually come back around and, worked with a lot of high level tennis players now. And it's actually become like a mini niche underneath this baseball community where now, we have some NFL quarterbacks, we have some, some top 20 tennis players that work out with us as well. So it's been kind of cool to see how it accidentally came full circle.
Very cool. So, something that I've noticed over the last couple decades is you have this sort of keen ability to be agnostic to any one training modality, and you blend everything from PRI to medicine ball training to some high level in-depth orthopedic evaluations. So when a new method comes out or sort of a new trend, what's your vetting process like, and how do you determine whether or not that's something that you're going to be adding to your current system?
Yeah, so I think it first comes back to an overarching theme of not trying to be like the renegade slash controversy seeker. And I think what we see very commonly are people that just like jump all in on one philosophy and try to exclude everybody else. And that sensationalized approach of I'm right and you're all wrong, you know what, it works for 4 to 6 months. And at the end of the day, it's a condescending way of looking at things. Just because, you know, I'm sure you guys would both agree, like you go back and you look at what you did 10 years ago and you want to do a face palm, right? Like, you know, it's Mike and I, we probably would have lost our hair a lot earlier if we realized back then how bad what we were doing was. And so I always try to take that same level of humility to know that, man, there's a lot of stuff out there that I haven't even encountered, stuff that's done in different languages that we don't even speak. You know, you look at like what the Stecos have done with like fascial manipulation, which was like purely in Italian for a long time until it came to the US. And, you know, that was a course that, you know, I went to earlier this year that blew my mind. And I've seen my business partner get some amazing results with it on the manual therapy side of things. So I always just try to be mindful that, you know, there are a lot of different philosophies out there, and it's up to us to not just borrow bits and pieces from each of them, but to recognize the overlap when they agree on things, right? PRI, DNS, they both include a lot of flexion bias stuff, which can be useful for athletes who are stuck in extension, right? So I try not to be a renegade, you know, seeker, and I try not to seek out controversy. But when it comes to actually evaluating things, I think there's a few levels to this. The first one is you have to make sure that you surround yourself with people that are going to check you. And I'm lucky that, you know, on the business side of things, obviously I have Pete, I have my wife, Anna. You know, on the training side of things, John O'Neill at our Massachusetts facility has always been great. You know, in our Florida facility, I have Shane, my business partner, Matt Hinckley, our pitching coordinator. I have Andrew Lissy, you know, who's our internship coordinator there. Just smart people that you can spitball with. So when you go to that seminar and you get your world rocked and you think of all these great things and you come back on Monday morning, the first thing that is a great system of checks and balances is you can't just take all the new exercises you learned and start adding them to programs, because then you have 10 coaches on your staff that have no idea what the exercise is, and you make them look like complete idiots in front of the clients, which never, ever, ever plays. So my mindset for our staff is when you get exposed to a new philosophy, you need to come back and we need to have a discussion about it, preferably in the context of you teaching it as a staff in service. So when I went to SFMA, it was awesome. I loved it. I came back and that Wednesday morning at our facility was, hey, here's what I took away from SFMA. Here's how I think it can impact our evaluative approach. Here are maybe some of those holes like that I think we're missing. Like our cervical screens can be a lot better. Let's look at, you know, where this goes. And then what we do when we see a DN or a DP on cervical extension, what's the avenue that we take? So I think having good people around you, having a system for who actually, you know, is kind of like the screener with you, and then figuring out where it actually fits in. But, you know, I'm going to put my career, I'm 42. Like I've been doing this over 2 decades now, which blows my mind. It kind of snuck up on me. If we're going to integrate some of this stuff, it takes wholesale changes, right? Because I've, you know, got 2 facilities in the private sector. We've got all of our Yankee stuff. I mean, that's coaches in a bunch of different states. We have the Dominican Academy, you know, we have all these different levels that have to be brought on board. So it's kind of like turning an aircraft carrier in a bathtub sometimes. We got to make sure that it's rolled out the right way so that nobody's put in an awkward position. But you're not going to overhaul now. You're going to change, you know, 1 or 2%. Maybe it's a new warm-up exercise. Maybe it's the way that you coach an old one. But you definitely got to have a filter. It's so important.
So Mike, before you jump in with the next one, when you have to be this is, and to steal a term from Kelly Starrett, a savage generalist, where you have to know so many things about so many different things. You coming in as the strength coach baseball guy, how is that received when you have to have that same message go to an infield coordinator as well as a team orthopedist as well as your, you know, strength staff, in terms of how well it's received? Because, you know, our roles used to be pretty much stay in the weight room, do your, you know, do your hour workout and then stay out of the rest of everything else. Now it's not that. Now you have hybrid roles like you have. How do you find that's getting received in your situation and beyond, and other people in roles like yours?
Yeah, I think it's getting better. That certainly was a huge issue in the past in professional sports. And I think I was fortunate. I worked with the Minnesota Twins as a consultant for 2018 and 2019. So I kind of got my first foot in the door with professional sports as a way of kind of seeing structures and things like that. And they have a very transformational leader, a guy named Derek Falvey, who's their chief baseball officer, and is actually a couple of years younger than me. But Derek's a guy who understands like how to empower people and how to create that cross department synergy to really, effectively, it's like the rising tide lifts all ships if you do it correctly. And so I kind of knew when the Yankees were reaching out to me about a position that was something that I thought was a really important key competency that we needed to move things in the direction that we wanted. And I'm fortunate that Brian Cashman's just an awesome leader. He's I use the term transformational leader, but that's something you can absolutely apply here in the sense that he makes sure that he finds directors that work very, very closely. I think the other thing too is you never want to feel like, particularly in a large organization like this, that it's really, really hard to create change. And it can be like that if you're always waiting on like approval from a general manager or for an owner or something like that. And we're really lucky in the way that we have things structured is that we can pivot really, really quickly and and take on new projects and things like that. So I'm lucky. Our director of baseball operations, Matt Ferry, is kind of my direct superior, who I go to when I have a question, when I have something I need to work through that we're trying to pivot. And he is just absolutely amazing at not just getting us connected with different departments and seeing who else can help the cause, but also always having like a keen eye for understanding how do we systematize this and how do we scale it? How do we make sure that everybody's in the loop? And that's an amazing ability to have, and it's something that honestly I've learned from both of them in the private setting. Is I never want to be the roadblock to our employees at CSP feeling like they can roll out a new initiative or try something different or just get approval. So it's kind of like when you hear the stories, I think is it the Four Seasons that has like the no questions asked. If you can make a customer happy for less than $500, go ahead and do it. Like, you want your people to really have this mindset of failing forward, like at least try and learn from it. It's tuition to the world of entrepreneurship. If we try something and it doesn't work, and as long as it's not an egregious mistake, then we can always find a way forward from it. So I definitely try to create that mindset. I'm not sure if it nurtured your question or answered your question, but it is something that I think we all need to be mindful of, is that, we all got to work together. We got to knock down those silos and just communicate really regularly with other departments.
Yeah, it absolutely seems like it's a team effort, almost like an F1 team, if you will. But
Yeah.
so, one of the things that you have to deal with in professional sports is injuries and injury prevention. And it's one of those things. It's a very, very controversial and hotly debated topic because, some people say we can control it. A lot of the research says we cannot. What is your thought process on, injury prevention, injury mitigation, whatever you want to call it?
Mm-hmm.
And how has it evolved over the course of your career?
Yeah. So the first thing I'll say, and the evolution aspect of that question might be the most compelling part of the answer, but everybody's broken. I think we know that, right? You can go and you look at asymptomatic MRIs of people, and you can find all kinds of stuff. Over 90% of pitchers, at all levels, really have fraying in their labrum. So posterior labral fraying is a normal finding in the throwing shoulder. But what is concerning is that injuries have actually outpaced sports medicine's ability to keep up with them. The injury rates in Major League Baseball have gone sky high every year. And what's scary is the minor league injuries and the amateur, side are even worse. And I'm particularly kind of in the mix on this. It's funny that we're talking about this because last night was the first night of the Major League Baseball draft. And there's been a lot more transparency in the draft medical process with the Major League Baseball combine for players, where basically players will opt into, various imaging studies, and they're all broken, like at every single level. It's absolutely mind-boggling to see what 16-year-old elbows look like. I actually looked at a family friend's imaging, 12-year-old kid who tore his UCL, avulsed his medial epicondyle, and had a high-grade flexor strain. Like, that's really hard to do. And one of my friends coached the team. He's like, I'm beating myself up. This kid was really talented. I managed his pitch count. I didn't overuse him. And he didn't tell me until the end of the season that he was pitching for another team at the same time. So the kid was literally doubling up on workload. And so stuff like that, like sports medicine can't keep up with idiocy. It never will. So I think it's, there's a lot of different angles to this. We'd love to think that the perfect warm up, while it will counteract, a lot of these things, and we'd love to think the perfect training volume and scrutinization of volume and all these things are going to help guys. But the game is just played at such high speeds. Like I'm actually recording my own podcast about this in the next couple of days. But really, if you look at Major League Baseball average fastball velocity in 2002, it was 89.0. And in 2022, it was 93.6. So average fastball velocity went up by 4.6 miles per hour at the highest level. And what's interesting about that is fastball usage went from 64 to 49%. So they throw 4.6 miles per hour harder, but hitters are so good at hitting fastballs now that we throw 15% fewer fastballs. So sliders are getting nastier, all these different things. And so there's just this crazy shift happening right now. That's just the nature of pitching, where, they're generally agreed upon that every mile an hour you increase velocity, it's about a 15 to 20% increase in elbow injury risk. You layer shoulders, you layer, necks on top of that. But the more fascinating thing is if you go downstream, there are corrections as players try to keep up with velocity, right? There's more random practice where they're taking more, instead of just taking easily group BP before game starts, they're getting fooled in batting practice. They're hitting more high velo on the machine, which can blow up wrists and thumbs if they're not using foam balls. We see more hitters getting hit by pitches. We see more catchers getting foul tips that are blowing up toes and thumbs and creating concussions. There's all these downstream effects to what velocity does. One thing that's fascinating right now, I actually just pulled the numbers. There was actually a really interesting study that showed that in Major League Baseball, pitcher comeback injuries are on the rise. In 2018, they had 19 injuries on pitcher comebacks. In 2019, it was 12. And then in 21 and 22, it was 6 and 8. This year, as of May 17th, they had already had 10 injuries to Major League pitchers. Then as of right now, we've had 3 skull fractures in Major League Baseball. Guys are throwing harder. They're selling out for velocity. They're leaving themselves more vulnerable. And so what you get is guys that are also swinging harder, it's just less time to react. The game is just changing so much that when you hear these people like, well, back in my day in 1988, like we played 161 games and no one ever pulled hamstrings. I'm like, yeah, that's because nobody ran fast. You were all roided out of your mind, and you guys were all using amphetamines to get out there and play when you weren't ready to go. So they've cleaned up the game from a PED standpoint, and then they played it at much higher levels because the training and the nutrition is so much better. So we're in a really, really tough time in baseball where, all these different entities, sports medicine, strength and conditioning, nutrition, performance science, amateur scouting, MLB as a whole, with scheduling and driving the direction of the game at the youth levels. Everybody's got to really collaborate to fix this, because it's unfortunately going in a really, really bad direction. And, that's obviously super concerning.
Now, it's ironic you mentioned this, Eric, because this was actually the burning question when I knew we were going to get a chance to talk to you. And because being, having that mindset, similar like what you're saying, is that trying to be that problem solver. And whether it's me, myself sitting there, or someone asked me, hey, you're a strength coach, what's the matter with all these injuries with this team or that team? And I try to think like, oh, could I have actually done anything about that? And to think philosophically, to say, okay, well, maybe it's some level, and maybe we can extend it beyond just baseball. Are we starting to tap a little bit into the ceiling of human capacity? Like, is the human body and its structure and chassis just not equipped to handle the repetition of 6'7", 270-pound people throwing a ball 100 mile an hour plus and hitting it at 120 miles an hour? Like, are we starting to get to the capacity where we've almost gotten so good at creating horsepower that we can't handle it?
Every time I've thought we're at a ceiling, I've been proved wrong. And if you literally look at how those velocities changed every year, it just seems to tick up by 0.1 to 0.3 miles per hour. On average, we were the hardest throwing team in Major League history last year, and the expectation is that we'll exceed it this year again. It's crazy. It's a very interesting time, and something that I don't think anybody really has a perfect solution for. The scary thing, though, is not just that the play at the highest levels has really search for it. It's also that, kids are so good so young. I mean, obviously they're hyper specialized, which has its own level of concern. But just to see kids from a pure, physics standpoint, throwing 100 miles an hour at age 17, like those arms just don't hold up. We know that they're going to blow out at some point, as terrible as it sounds. So it obviously impacts draft strategy and, where you invest your resources and all this stuff. So no, I'd like to think that we are going to get to, at some point, to the limits of human performance, and then allow ourselves to take a breath and be like, all right, this is what it's going to be. How is it that we, then can work to prepare athletes better for what this ultimate goal is? But no, I mean, the numbers seem to be escalating every year. We got guys throwing 105, 106 now. It could be 108, 109, 110 someday. And, you're seeing guys hit the ball 120. So it's just a really, really scary combination. I think one thing that eventually is going to have to be addressed, and the hope would be that there would be a trickle-down effect, is I'll backtrack a little bit. I have a lot of friends who work in other professional sports. So, I was talking with Art Horn, who's, close friend, is with the Celtics, know Kevin Neal with the Bruins. These guys are all over the place. And when I talk to my friends in different sports, the things that they are always blown away at is our schedule. So like, as an example, we played 58 games in 61 days between April and May. And you played double headers, but the Major League Baseball season at 162 games is just absolutely insane. It was even more condensed last year because of the work stoppage. But you're going to see scenarios where players are 200 games in 230 days. So it's a grind. And what's really hard, that's different about hockey or the NBA, and certainly NFL, if you have someone who's a little bit banged up in those sports, you can get them a game off and it buys them like 5 days. Like, that's a really big deal. You roll an ankle, like, you can throw the kitchen sink at it. Like in Major League Baseball, like, you might roll an ankle and be doing treatments on it at 11 p.m. in the training room, and you have a 1 o'clock game the next morning. Like, back-to-backs just don't happen nearly as much as they used to in other sports. In the NFL, what do you get? You get a guy who's banged up and he doesn't practice for 5 days. You test the waters a little bit on Saturday, and then, they inject him with whatever to get him back out there on Sunday, and they just lather, rinse, repeat for the entire season. In baseball, you literally can't do that, because if you try to wait it out, you only have 3 days to backdate an injury from an injury list standpoint. And then there's always someone that's going to make up those innings. So if you're down an arm in the bullpen and all of a sudden your starter only gives you 2 innings, like, those are innings that someone else has to cover. Or on the position player side, you got someone who's obviously playing out of position. Maybe your 5th outfielder has to go out and play 4 days in a row, and they're not built up to that. It's just a really hard dynamic. And that's why sometimes the injuries versus the actual injury list, like, the injury list is more of a measure of, kind of roster management, where you have to make a call on, like, do I want to try to play, a man down for 3 days because he'll be back, or do I value having an extra guy there? And then, teams' resources play into that as well, where, you have to decide, would I put him on the 60-day IL instead of the 15-day IL, because it gives me a little bit more flexibility with our 40-man roster. So when you look at, like, the actual, like, man games lost, it's not always a reflection of the injuries that are taking place. It's probably more indicative of, like, an overall, like, approach to managing how you deal with mild, moderate, and severe injuries, and the amount of risk that you're willing to take on it as an organization. So, but baseball in general is absolutely unique, and just so much different than other sports, not just because of the nature of the schedule, but also the forces that we're creating, and the fact that, like, nowhere in other sports are you as reliant on a ligament this big, that can literally undo a year and a half of an athlete's career.
So there's a bunch of points that you hit there that I want to circle back to, and it's
Sure.
it's very interesting, this strange dichotomy. And in the last 5 minutes, you talked about how we're really succeeding in sports science in terms of doing some amazing things, like the fact that we're getting people creating these types of velocities and types of bat speeds, and even speed on the base paths, and we're doing it in an era you would think those would be numbers we got in the PD errors, and we're blowing those numbers away with just really smart sports science. But at the same time, we can't keep up with it in terms of the durability of it. And maybe it is just the repetition of it, like you said, in terms of the wear and tear of having to do that on a regular basis versus a little more irregular of a couple times or even once a week.
Yeah, absolutely. It's absolutely completely at odds with one another. And that's why one of the things that I come back to is the reason it's the case is because kids are broken so young. You know, I mean, you can do everything right, but if you're dealing with all right, let's say Mike goes out and buys a brand new Ferrari and he changes the oil every day, he washes it, he does everything he possibly can to take care of it. But if they kind of forgot to put the brakes in there in the first place, there's probably going to be an issue at some point, no matter how pristine the fuzzy dice in the mirror are and how well vacuumed it is. And I think that's some of the stuff that we're dealing with, is that so many of these kids that are actually entering the game, whether it's, you know, high school kids that are drafted or kids that are leaving, you know, the NCAA programs, they tend to be broken. Being honest, like, this isn't just a pro baseball thing. Like, if you look, the numbers are outrageous in college baseball right now. To be honest, the younger levels are where the injuries are even worse. It's pretty eye-opening that I think last year we came up on just under 300 UCL surgeries across all professional levels. So if you take all 30 major league organizations on average are about 10 per year. And that's just elbows, mixing some shoulders, some thoracic outlets, you know, some various things that, you know, that go beyond that. And it's a pretty eye-opening thing.
It's pretty scary that TJ surgeries become almost a rite of passage. And it's not a matter of, you know, did you get it done? It's when did you get it done?
Yeah.
Which ties in with something else that you said, is talking about long-term athletic development. And I love that you said earlier that the back in my day guys who say, oh, we didn't have these injuries back in my day. Well, you also played 18 games a year, you know, and you also threw, you know, 65 miles an hour. So explain how that heuristic of the back in my day just doesn't hold up. Like, I don't think people comprehend. And I know, because I have two boys who played all the way up to the college level, and I saw what travel ball and the showcase schedule and all that can do to somebody, that's going to have a significant amount of impact on what we're seeing in those trends that you're talking about.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, so I think there's really two angles, right? It's one, what's the direct impact, right? You know, these kids are more likely to have overuse injuries, you know, specific pattern overload problems. Like that's obviously a very big concern when you go out and you know, you see a youth softball pitcher, you know, throwing 4 games in a weekend or something like that. It's just absolutely mind-boggling. But then there's also the opportunity cost. Like, what else could they have been doing? And to be honest, I even see it myself. I have twin 8-year-old daughters that are playing softball now, and they play during the softball season. You know, like we might do a little bit of like fall, like clinic stuff, like one night a week or something like that this fall, but they're going to play soccer in the fall, and they do gymnastics kind of throughout the year, once or twice a week. They have dance, they do all these different things, but on their team, they actually had, you know, a couple girls that were like travel ball girls. So they'd play on our normal team, and then they're, you know, they'd hop on the road and they'd go to Georgia for 8 games in a weekend or something like that. And I'm looking at it, I'm like, man, I can't imagine driving or flying for an 8-year-old softball tournament when I could just go flip batting practice like in the backyard to my daughters, and they get the same benefit at that age, and at the same time be able to stay close to home and, you know, experience all the good things that come with that at a young age. But you know, I think the other aspect of it is what's getting pushed out. You know I watch my daughters, and they can't walk across the room without doing cartwheels, and like one of them just walks right up to me and does handstands and makes me hold her feet every day. Like it's like a constant, they're craving variety in all aspects of life. They need to be stimulated, whether it's hopping in the pool or going out and riding their scooters or their bikes, whatever it is. And when you see kids that specialize, there's just so much variability that's pushed out, you know, things that they just aren't exposed to. And you know, I think, you know, I'm sure you guys were the same way. Like, I wanted to be playing as many different sports as I possibly could at that age. And I had one friend that tore his ACL playing indoor soccer in like a collision in high school. That was the only ACL I had ever seen, you know, in my high school career. I didn't know they existed. And his was a contact injury that took place. So it's just such a weird dynamic now to see these happening at such high rates.
Hey, everybody, a quick break in the action here. Hope you're enjoying the show, and we appreciate you listening. We're working hard to bring you the highest quality content and best guests every single week. So if you could do us a big favor and go and like and subscribe to the show on whatever platform you get your podcasts on, it would be greatly appreciated. Be sure to listen at the end of the show also to find out where you can find out more information about our courses, as well as a special discount code for all our listeners. Thanks again, and let's get back to the show. Now, I remember hearing an interview with Buck Showalter many years ago, and he might have been with the Orioles at the time, and saying he had a cautionary flag. And you mentioned the draft is happening as we speak. He had a cautionary flag to say, I try to, if I can, avoid those year long, February to November guys who that's all they've ever lived and breathed since they were 11 years old, because they're going to usually break down. They're going to break down on your dime. Right. But I don't know if that's something that you can even be that selective with now, because it's so far and few between to find great ball players who haven't gone through that. And it's not just baseball, it's basketball with AAU and so many other sports. So do you have that cautionary flag for a player that's kind of had that life versus maybe that 3-sport athlete who's been a little more diverse?
Absolutely. I mean, the research supports it. There's evidence to show that, the difference between northern and southern players, and that's not just like a geographic thing. Like, it's just the nature of what weather will allow. Like, if you're a pitcher in Massachusetts, it's really hard to go throw bullpens outside against hitters in December. So anecdotally, like, it was much easier for me to develop arms in Massachusetts than it was in Florida, because in Florida they were always like working with a private pitching coach on the side or going out and playing for a new select team. It's an incredibly broken model. But I absolutely, have an eye on that stuff. And I do a lot of work on the amateur draft side of things. So without getting into too much detail on it, but that's something that we look at really, really closely, is like, what's the likelihood this kid's going to break down, but also what's his window of adaptation? If you're a kid who's played 3 sports and you're already able to compete with some of the best, and then we actually make you a full-time baseball player, there's a million different things that we can really attack to chase your upside. In the context of baseball, the things that we're really good at. What I can't do is take a kid who's played baseball for 15 years exclusively and then expect him to like go out and learn how to play soccer at age 24 while, we're trying to turn him into a major leaguer. That's a very upside down model. So I think you got to do a wide variety of things at a young age, and it's going to serve you really well.
All right, so let's keep going with the LTAD stuff, and with baseball, you have a really unique sport, and that the best in the world come in so many different shapes, sizes, and styles. And you have an MVP one year who's 5'6" and 165, and the next year he's 6'7", 270. So it wouldn't really seem that there seems to be a single prototype for success. But is there a common theme that you see when you see players coming up through the ranks from what the youth level to high school up into the collegiate and amateur level, that you see these common threads, at least from a physical standpoint, that you see them transcending into an elite level?
Yeah, it's interesting you say that. I don't know that there's a specific thread that you'll see shortstops that don't run well, right? You know what I mean? You'll see guys that are freak athletes. So they come in all shapes and sizes. You're generally not going to see a lot of elite hitters in the major leagues who don't have good vision. So that's something that, you kind of picked your parents and you're given what you're given, but there probably are some interventions that will support that along. But I don't know that it's a purely physical discussion. The reason is a lot of people in baseball are successful because of traits and characteristics, right? Maybe it's hypermobility, maybe it's long fingers, maybe it's the ability to manipulate a baseball differently. We've seen guys who have like a middle finger that's a inch and a half longer than other fingers on their hands. So I think that is a little bit of a tricky question to answer. Whereas like you look at like the NHL, like body fat percentage predicts future NHL performance from the combine, right? That's probably more indicative of, do you eat right? Do you take care of yourself? All that stuff. So I think it's a less purely physically outcome driven model. Certainly like throwing harder increases your likelihood of success. Hitting the ball harder increases your likelihood of success. But those are generally downstream from other athletic qualities. But I also think that's what makes baseball beautiful, is that big leaguers come in all shapes and sizes. Like you said, we've seen dramatically different players win the MVP. You see lefties, you see righties, you see, all kinds of different crazy stuff. And that's also what makes the job challenging, is you've got to figure out the right mix for every player. But there are, certain key competencies that we hone in on. You've got to be efficient in rotation, all those different things. But I'm very, very reluctant to say like this predicts this, because every time we've tried to do that in the history of baseball, we've fallen flat on our face.
Now, the other interesting thing connecting the dots with the LTAD stuff is, when you see so much specialization, at least I've seen it, is that you almost see this increase in baseball skill with an accompanying decrease in general athleticism. To your point earlier, is that the kids who had that opportunity cost where they didn't go out and play other sports and they can't do other things. Have you seen that as being a challenge with some of the super specialized, you have kids who are POs when they're 12, 13 years old. Do you see that with some of this hyper specialization, we've given away some athleticism in exchange?
No doubt about it. That's for sure. I mean, you have to remember too that the best athletes are always going to be the best athletes, right? So like I appreciate the intention of it when they say like, oh, XYZ first rounders in the NFL draft this year were multi-sport athletes. I'm like, yeah, that's because they were freaks and they were good at absolutely everything, right? They were voted most athletic in their high school, and they did that because they could excel in absolutely everything. I think we need to take a step back and look at, what happens when, the mediocre athlete, that wants to be really, really good doesn't participate in other things. Those are the ones that are one-trick ponies that, honestly can't, thrive across different mediums. And that's something we should be more concerned with.
Okay, now I want to circle back to something else that you said earlier. I just made a note of when you look at injury stats for a team. And from my experience in having consulting with some NFL teams, I know we'd had situations where our injury stats were terrible one year, and then another year they were great. And you know what we did differently? Absolutely nothing. Right. And one of the main things that I saw from the inside was the team was better. Right. The team was better. Like, so more guys would want to do whatever they could to get on that field for the next day, as you said earlier. So like in the NFL, where you have 7 days, we'd have guys where it was optional to see me for, hey, could you figure out, I'm not quite hurt enough to go in that training room, but I'm not quite right, and I need to play this weekend. Those guys, when we had winning seasons, I had a line of them. And then on the years that we were out of the playoffs early, those years, it was like, yeah, you know what? If I go on IR, I get paid the same. I could be with my family, and I don't have to risk my health to go out and play in a meaningless game. So those stats get really swayed by that, and people don't see that. The caller who calls into talk radio doesn't see that. They just see injuries and numbers and say, oh, we're injured all the time.
Yeah. I mean, I think you nailed it. No doubt about it. I think what it is just a reminder to always be focused on processes and not outcomes, right? Because you can do everything right and have a guy run into a wall and get hurt, and that's that, and it counts the same. There's all those different avenues through which those numbers are actually inflated or deflated. You have teams that honestly will release guys when they think they're hurt, and so they'll rescue themselves. It's probably morally wrong, right? If a player gets hurt on your watch, you're responsible for taking care of them. But we do see those, that some of those players get burned when they try to play through something, and they want to keep it hush hush, and then they get released, and then they're in a terrible spot. So it goes both ways on that. But you always got to be mindful that there is a difference between being hurt and being on the IL, and being hurt and grinding through it, as you noted. But here's something also that I had Lauren Landau on my podcast, and he brought up a great point. Is he was with the Broncos for years, and he said the number one predictor of hamstrings injuries in the NFL is high speed yardage. And well, here's what we both know, right? There are NFL coaches that run their guys ragged during the week, and there are other ones that are totally into workload management, that understand how to fluctuate training stress throughout the week. And you'll see, huge variance based on that. So you're kind of at the mercy of what your skill coach decides. The NBA is obviously like this. Baseball is a little bit different. Usually where that will come into play is like bullpen usage is, if you have a manager that wants to use a bullpen like crazy, and, the starter gets one guy on in the second inning, he's getting somebody hot in the bullpen already. And so you look at the bullpen, it's like, oh, that guy made 52 appearances. And look, actually he made 120 because he was getting hot over and over again. He just never went in the game. So we're very big on scrutinizing that side of things. And you can also look at like games played is a really tricky measure in the sense that, sometimes you might go 0 for 4 with 4 strikeouts and literally just walk back and forth to the dugout. And then if you're like a center fielder, right, you're backing up right and left field, then you like out a triple, you get a single, you steal second, overthrow, you go to third. Like the number of high-speed bouts can vary dramatically. So that's something that you definitely have to track. And sometimes guys may actually undertrain, where you need to throw some additional stimuli in there so they don't detrain. And we know that running fast can be protective on future bouts of running fast. So it's this huge logjam of information that can all drive that final outcome. Player age is another big one. Like younger teams will always be, healthier than older teams. That's just something that's very well accepted in the game. So, if you're going to take on older players, you have to know that there's more risk that comes with them, and you can't quite, push them like you would a 25-year-old.
And to back up your point earlier, all that stuff, that even if you in a perfect world could get done, and if it was the solution, that's not easy to get done when you're finishing a game at 10:30 at night and you have to be on a plane and then play the next day. When is this actually getting done? right?
Yeah,
So
we had an interesting experience last year. I mentioned there was a Major League Baseball lockout, and so the season was shortened a little bit in the context of spring training. But what they also had to do is they had to make up for the first two series of the year, which had been missed because the season got going later. So what they actually did was they shortened the All-Star break and added a double header in. So instead of being a 4-day All-Star break, it actually was a 3-day one. And what happened was the first day off the All-Star break, we went and we played in Houston. We played a double header. And then after that game, we flew overnight to Baltimore and played a 7 o'clock game. So we actually played 3 games in 30 hours in 2 different time zones. So that's hard to do if you're in one place at like a tournament, just from like field scheduling and all that stuff. And that's at the highest level. They're all, hotly contested games and all that stuff. So it's just very eye-opening that can actually happen, at these highest levels. But you're right. Like, you gotta do treatments, you gotta do all these different things. And, the travel is another big determinant of how players feel and perform.
yeah, because on top of all that, you see injury statistics that show when you get below that threshold of sleep hours and quality sleep, the number of injuries that go up. So you have to factor that in as well. And you're not sometimes getting the best sleep when you're going on planes, trains, and automobiles to get from one place to the other. So, I know even some teams have changed their schedules. And I think one of the Yankees early on, one of the first teams to jump ahead of that, right? With in terms of and making sure that sleep was prioritized as opposed to the more militant, hey, let's get up and after it at the 6 a.m. kind of workout type of deal.
Yeah, so some of it's very controllable and some of it isn't. So yeah, we do scrutinize things pretty aggressively, and the players all get information about how to optimally design their sleep as they travel. But you look at like the thing about the Yankees is we always seem to put butts in the seats, so they generally sell well wherever we go. So you're not going to play a lot of 1 o'clock getaway games where you can actually have an easier adjustment. Usually what you're going to do is you're going to play at 7 o'clock. The game's going to end at 10:15. There's going to be treatments, post-game media, all that stuff. And you're not going to probably get on a flight until, most cases 12 to go to wherever the next city is. So it's a lot of overnight flying and, late arrivals to the stadium or wherever the new town is to go to your hotel room and sleep from, 5 to 11 a.m. and then, go back to the park and do it again in a few hours. So other teams have the benefits of playing a lot of 1 o'clock games, but you also look at like the Seattle Mariners who fly more miles than anybody else. That's, a hard dynamic. If you're the Mariners and you got to go play a game in Tampa Bay, you got a lengthy flight with 3 hours, difference. It's a lot to adjust to.
That's the glamorous side that people don't see. And then you factor that into why today's game is so much different than go back in the days when you're talking about 12, 14 teams that didn't have to travel as much and had more spread out schedules.
It's a very different world. But I think there's also there's more working in their favor as well. Like we have better nutrition. Certainly the hotels are better. The travel dynamic is as good as it can be. And from a sports medicine standpoint, like, players in the 80s, they didn't have diagnostic ultrasound in the training room. Maybe they had x-rays on site, but, they didn't have access to PRP and, other biological interventions that can help the cause. So there is more access to sports medicine resource. We just know more, right? Where someone who had thoracic outlet in the early 80s kind of just dealt with it or they retired because they couldn't figure it out. And nowadays it's an intervention that could potentially save their career. So I think, there's a little bit of a give and take that we do have to recognize that there are some positive outcomes that are trending in the right direction.
It's funny you mentioned something. There was a guy I used to have who's he told me the vast difference he had between the minor league level and the major league level. And you're talking about across the board when you said access to nutrition. Like, when he sent me the menu when he got, called up, and he was there the 4 seasons in LA. And he said, this is what I get to pick from. He said, when I was in low A ball, I got what was ever left at the snack bar, like the peanuts and popcorn and pizza. So like, that's a different thing to manage, right? When you're talking about these guys are on a very different plane when they're riding on buses, that makes it even harder. And they don't have access to the things that you have. They don't have catered and planned out meals at every level at every different venue.
Yeah, and it's certainly not a homogenous experience across all organizations. And to be fair, the minor league lifestyle has improved dramatically over the last couple of years, where players are getting housing and the transportation is better and all that stuff. But yeah, it's still not the big leagues. There's incentive to get to the big leagues on a number of fronts, and that's certainly one of them. But I do think it's something that's heading in the right direction. But yeah, you see very different experiences across different organizations. We traded for players that come over and say, "Oh my gosh, like I know what the big leagues were until I got here." So it's a big picture conversation for sure.
Absolutely. So I don't want to sound like I'm monopolizing the conversation. Mike just texted me he's having some issues with his internet, so I'm just riding it throughout. And since we're on nutrition, and before we wrap it up, I got to know from the master, what makes the best meatball? What are the qualities of a very good meatball?
That's funny. We actually do a lot of our own. In fact, I wrote an article. I think it's called The 10 Laws of Meatball Mastery, if anybody really wants to go in depth on this stuff. But we'll use like grass-fed beef, usually use almond flour. And the nice thing is you can throw in a bunch of different vegetables. So we'll usually use like spinach always works well. Onions always work well. You can mix in like peppers, sliced up carrots, stuff like that, and mix it up. And the nice thing is it's kind of poetic license. Once you've got meat and it's in a ball shape, you can kind of go and you can rock some hot sauce on it. You can use marinara, you can use regular spaghetti sauce, whatever you want to do. But I tend to be like a hot sauce guy. So
I'd hate to disagree with the master, but I'm very anti-carrot, especially near my meatballs. Bake, fry. What do we do? How do we do it?
We usually bake them, and they're more like meat boulders. You could eat them like an apple if you needed to. So, but yeah, it works a little bit better when you're trying to get a little bit of bulk out of them.
Fantastic. Well, can't thank you enough for your time. And before we wrap things up, in addition to all the 18 jobs that you have, do you have anything other than that in terms of new and exciting things coming up in 2023?
Yeah, for sure. We're actually working through some pretty exciting additional facility renovations at our Florida location, just to kind of keep improving the athlete experience, particularly. So we've kind of grown exponentially, and there's not enough office space for our staff. So we're trying to build that out a little bit better. And then honestly, getting back a little bit more to speaking, kind of product creation, some of that stuff too. So kind of pulled back on it since the pandemic, and I'm excited to get back to teaching a little bit more.
Well, definitely let us know about that so we can get the word out. I want to thank you again, Eric, for your time. This has been awesome. And want to thank you for listening. And this has been the Principles of Performance podcast. Thank you for listening to the Principles of Performance podcast. If you've enjoyed our content, please like and share on your social media outlets, as well as subscribe and give us a review on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, or whatever your preferred platform is to listen to. For more information on the Principles of Program Design courses and workshops, visit us at www.principlesofprogramdesign.com and follow us on all the social media channels where we post new content every day. To save 10% on any PPD courses, enter the discount code PRINCIPLESPODCAST10 at checkout. If you have any questions we can answer or suggestions for the show, you can email us at info@principlesofprogramdesign.com or message us on social media. Thank you again for your support.